Hello there, a very good morning and welcome to your 10 a.m. update from the People's Progressive Party. I'm joined this morning by Prime Minister-elect Brigadier Mark Phillips and Attorney at Law Marcia Nadir Sharma. Brigadier Phillips, Marcia, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you,
Morning,
Ed. Hello,
morning,
Marcia.
Eddie. Morning, PM. Morning, viewers.
All right,
Morning,
so
viewers.
if we can get quickly into this, we know the most recent development would have been, and this happened yesterday, where the chair of GECOM would have written to the chief elections officer in very clear terms, giving him directions and instructions with regards to the preparation of his report, which is expected to be submitted today. What I'll do, I'll probably pull up the letter that was sent to Mr. Lowenfield, maybe read the letter so that the public gets an understanding of the contents, and then we can have some sort of discussions based on that letter. So if I can get to this here quickly. Right. Um, Give me 1 second so I can get the letter up. All right. So here is the letter. Um, okay. So based on the letter dated the 9th of July and addressed to the Chief Elections Officer, Justice Claudette Singh says, and I quote, Dear CEO, Section 18 of the Elections Law Act number 15 of 2000 stipulates that you are subject to the direction and control of the Commission. In accordance with this section and pursuant to Article 177(2)(b of the Constitution and Section 96 of the Representation of the People Act, Chapter 1:03, you are hereby requested to prepare and submit your report on the March 2, 2020 general and regional elections by 2 p.m. on the 10th of July 2020, that is today, using the valid votes counted in the national recount as per certificates of recount generated therefrom. So the chair was quite specific in her instructions as to first highlighting that the CEO is under the direction of the commission, and more importantly, to say specifically what data must be used to prepare his report. Marcia, if we can dissect this letter a little.
Morning, everybody. Morning, Ed. That letter was a letter that I think most of Guyana was waiting for to see, maybe coming out of today's meeting. So it was a welcome sight last night when it was breaking news. What can we say about the letter? The letter is essentially clearly an instruction by the chairwoman of the Elections Commission to the CEO, a statutory employee of the commission, to carry out a particular function. And persons might, I mean, it might even be better to break it down from a perspective of paragraph by paragraph, because I would have expected that as of this morning, there would be a lot of interpretations as to what this letter could mean. And when, as far as I understand, we use very simple, plain English language to communicate our intents and our meanings. So what this letter did is essentially established. Most of Guyana would have known that Mr. Lowenfield, on the 23rd of June, it was, or a little after 23rd, when he submitted his alter ego type report, he would have come out and said that he is not subject and answerable to anyone because he's a constitutional office. Well, this letter is basically in the very first paragraph, reminds him of where he stands in the hierarchy. And being former GDF and former Army, he must understand. Someone thought it wise to remind him of his responsibility, which is to be second to or listen to or subject to the control of the commission. And you have to applaud Madam Chair for establishing that authority. In case you forgot, Under Section 18, you are under our supervision and control. Okay? And then you move on, obviously, to the second paragraph, which deals with what he's supposed to do. And under Section 96 of the Representation of the People's Act and Article 177 2B, he is required to present a report which he's very familiar with, one which he did in 2015. This is not something, he's not a novice at this. He performed this function very aptly in 2015, and prior to 2015, he was part and parcel of the commission in 2011, so he's fully aware of what is required of him. He can't claim ignorance now. And what he is supposed to do is to take the 10 10 certificates, district certificates that were issued at the national recount, which clearly enunciates and express total valid votes. Total sum, 460,000 plus. And what she's saying is based on 96, Section 96 of ROPA and 177, you need to present those tables and that tabulation for us so that we now can complete our constitutional duty.
So I'll bring you in here, Brigadier, but what is very clear, because I think what she did there is to clarify quite easily and for the public to understand and for Lowenfield to understand, because the letter has been made public so people have an understanding, is to ensure that she identify not just to say valid votes cast, but to say to use the certificates of recount, which would eliminate any other interpretations that Lowenfield may want to come up with, like he did with that previous report, where he sought to remove what, in his estimation, in his personal view, illegally so, what he thought to be invalid votes. So I think that to pointing him directly to where you must extract this information was quite instructive. Brigadier, I bring you in here on this particular issue.
Thank you, Ed. As you and Marcia quite rightly said, you know, Mr. Lowenfield has clear instructions now as to who is in charge, and in the military we call it command relationship. He's a statutory officer working for a constitutional body, and the chair of that body had his issued clear instructions to him. So in that letter, he knows clearly the command relationship and what is required of him. In this instance, he has to submit the results of the recount in his report. That is quite clear. Here's another opportunity for Mr. Lowenfield, even if he claimed that, you know, he misinterpreted or he was misguided by the Court of Appeal ruling. Now that ruling is invalidated, he has another opportunity to submit what is required by the commission in order to make a declaration. Mm-hmm. If you could recall in 2015, and I think one of the commissioners mentioned it, that they, on submission of the report by the chief elections officer, which in 2015 was the same Mr. Lowenfield, the meeting lasted like about 15, 20 minutes. And they made a declaration. So once Mr. Lowenfield operates as a true professional, use this opportunity to come good, forget what he did in the past, be a professional, submit the report in keeping with the letter, and once the commissioners from the government side attend the meeting this afternoon, we can have a declaration. We can have all things being equal, we can have a declaration this afternoon and just bring ease to the stress of this wider Guyanese population, you know, who've been waiting patiently. I must commend our people for waiting patiently for this report, this declaration. It can be done today.
Brigadier, you touched on a very important issue there, where you mentioned the fact that he can redeem himself by, you know, doing the right thing. And we see a lot of people fortunately or unfortunately, many of them are not living in Guyana and may be very much out of touch with the reality on the ground, where you're cheering him on to say, continue to do what you did the last time. Guyanese, quote unquote, are, what was it? Guyanese have your back. Um, but this is a small group of people who are mainly living overseas, I suspect, and those in the APNU-AFC cabal who are hell bent on rigging the elections and thwarting the will of the people. But the point has been made repeatedly that while all of this is being said to Mr. Lowenfield, at the end of the day, he has over his head 3 private criminal charges. And Mr. Lowenfield will be the only person standing in the docks whenever he is brought before the court.
Absolutely.
None of these people who are cheering him on are not going to be there. Matter of fact, when the matter was called the last time, even though he was absent, we haven't seen a lawyer from the APNU-AFC present there. We haven't seen the same people who are saying who are cheering him on and say we have your back. We haven't seen any of them outside the court or inside the court to say they're there to support Lowenfield, to show their solidarity to him.
If I could jump in here, Ed, I made this point yesterday, and I have to say it again, and I hope, somehow or the other, Mr. Lowenfield either hears it or someone tells him. Again, I go back to what my parents say, show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. But yet the universe seems to constantly be giving Mr. Lowenfield umpteen chances to fix and correct the things that the unlawful actions or omissions, I should say, that he has continuously taken upon himself to do since essentially the 4th of March, because everything started really and truly from the 4th of March, where his word no longer became valuable or credible. And, it's very easy for someone to sit on the sidelines and egg you on and say, yeah, man, you do this thing. It's akin to somebody telling you, and forgive me for using such a very raw metaphor, but if somebody tells you to commit a crime, okay, your good sense, good conscience, your professionalism, your civic duty, and everything else, your moral compass should tell you that this thing is wrong. I should not do it. Why shouldn't I do it? And it's a process. Why shouldn't I do it? Because my family will be affected. My integrity will be affected. For crying out loud, I can be placed into prison if I'm found guilty for life. Okay, and so it doesn't just affect you, the individual. It has far-reaching consequences for everybody down the line. Even a future CEO, he will now have so many eyes on him that it's very difficult to be an employee in an environment where you're constantly being watched over, and the elements of mistrust are there. So this is not just about Mr. Lowenfield. This is about telling us who you are as a man, telling us what you stand for, and not just standing up and saying, oh, I'm an honest and decent man with integrity, but yet my actions show contrary, and so this is again a perfect opportunity for Mr. Lowenfield to say here. All right, the Court of Appeal, while the decision materialized in an outcome that was desirous by the APNU-AFC, and maybe for whatever reason, let's assume benefit of the doubt that he was being pressured into doing this act, that he wasn't doing this act willfully and on his own. Here you have the CCJ saying, okay, if you need help, I'll tell you what is help. There's no question as to what is a valid vote. A valid vote, by the time you get to Article 177, the counting process would have gone through enough rigorous transparency and accountability type methodology that would have made identifying which, or let me use the words of the CCJ, would have weeded out the spoiled and the rejected votes, which would therefore be invalid, and we would have now have a pool of valid votes. And in this case, again, I say it is over 460,000 plus. Okay, so you don't have any issue to worry about, Mr. Lowenfield. Valid votes have already been determined. So you just need to do what you did in 2015, put it down on paper and present it in electronically and manually as required by the law to the commission for them to act.
Brigadier, I bring you in here because having regard to what Marcia said about Mr. Lowenfield redeeming himself and so on, and the implications that it will have for not just himself, but his immediate family, relatives, and so forth. The fact remains that if Mr. Lowenfield is to continue with the same actions like he did previously, and for some reason or the other he's brought before the court and jail, Mr. Lowenfield has to recognize that he alone will be sitting in jail and not those people who are egging him on.
Well, you know, yes, but in addition to that, it will be demoralizing for the senior officials of the GECOM Secretariat to have as their boss a rogue CEO who, you know, notwithstanding what is required of him, what is requested of him in writing, choose to do something else. Because, you know, when you are the top of an organization, you create a climate, a management climate, a leadership climate, you know, and if you're the rogue, that's a rogue climate you're creating. And it's not good for GECOM, the Secretariat, because, you know, you have a deputy CEO and you have assistant CEO and other senior people. And I know many of those senior functionaries in GECOM, notwithstanding the personal, political, you know, affiliation or whatever, because all of us will vote. Many of those people are professionals and they will want to follow the law in doing their work and to see their superior officer following the law. And Mr. Lowenfield has a final opportunity, as both Marcia said and I said yesterday, of following the law. Be a professional. His strength today is in submitting a report in accordance with what is requested by the chair, in accordance with the articles and the sections of the law that is in that letter that will serve the purpose to guide him in putting together his report. That is the strength of the man. Follow the law and submit a report. Don't bow and be weak to those out there who may see themselves as your friends and your associates who wants you to go against the law, to violate the law. So Mr. Lowenfield has to be a professional. He has to be strong. He has to fight off all those so-called friends and follow the law so he can regain the respect of his subordinates, his peers, and his superiors by simply following the law and submit the report in accordance with the letter sent to him by the chair. And not hide. You cannot hide. You cannot be found. You have 2 o'clock today to submit the report. Submit the report in keeping with the deadline. Cannot report sick. Reporting sick is not an option. That it's a sense of weakness trying to report sick, because that is not required now. This whole nation is waiting on Mr. Lowenfield to submit his report.
And PM, we know he's capable of submitting a report in less than 24 hours because
exactly,
he's done
he did it before.
Exactly.
So while the chair of GECOM would have been quite clear in her letter to Mr. Lowenfield in terms of what he's required to do, we are still seeing attempts by the coalition to spin and to interpret and misinterpret the ruling of the CCJ and trying to give all sorts of opinions that are not consistent with first and foremost the law, and that are
Mm-hmm.
not consistent with what the CCJ would have ruled. And one such instance is that of Basil Williams. Um, him being quoted in the Guyana Chronicle, for example, today, saying that the commission cannot instruct Mr. Lowenfield. I think this matter was dealt with, was well ventilated already, and the ruling of the CCJ captures this. But interestingly, Marcia, from a legal perspective, let me read this one paragraph that Mr. Williams said here. He
Mm-hmm.
reasoned that the framers of the Constitution and legislature envisaged that the CEO would independently prepare his advice under Article 177(2)(b). Then he went on to say GECOM cannot rely on Section 18 of the Election Law Amendment Act, which provides that the CEO is subject to the direction and control of the Commission, because it would be in conflict with provisions of Article 172(b) and Section 96 of the ROPA. This by itself, here quoting Basil Williams, is conflicting. You explaining this in legal but layman terms.
I can't say that I can agree with Mr. Williams's assessment or analysis, nor can I say it's conflicting. It escapes me. The logic escapes me, and so I wouldn't even attempt to understand what Mr. Williams is trying to connote or to tell anybody. But the reality is, subject to the power, the control and supervision is just that. It is to remind Mr. Lowenfield that you are not independent of us. You are not an island on your own or a country of your own that you can take it upon yourself to be judge, jury, and executioner, which he attempted to do. Okay? And what is inconsistent about that and what he's required to do under the Section 96 and Article 77, it escapes me. It's very simple. He is required, it's no different for, and I said this earlier, it's no different to a chairman of the board or a board of an organization saying to your managing director, your CEO, listen, we hear what you said. We want you to present to us a report that follows the strict and literal application of the law. And the strict and literal application of the law in this particular instance is to present to us a tabulation of the valid votes count determined at the national recount. We have seen as of June 16th and June 23rd, well, the June 23rd report is no longer relevant and valid, but we saw your report of June 16th, was it June 16th? June 13th, sorry. And you placed in it all of your opinions, your speculations, your everything else. That was your advice, okay? But if you need the advice of somebody, it does not mean that only that person's advice must be the thing to act on. And what I mean is, it's simply saying to him two things. You can't bring all those extra flowers and decorations to what a simple requirement is: 460,000 plus votes, 233,000 for the PVPC. Okay? That's the first one. Secondly, you can give me your advice, but I don't have to comply with your advice. It just simply means that provision, and I know this is I've heard the coalition say that only on the advice of the CEO. Yeah, only on the advice of the CEO. They can't go and listen to Basil Williams and Jagdio for what to do and what not to do. They can't come with another piece of paper. The law is not, as we all have become very popular and known, familiar with, is not obscure. Probably use the wrong word there. Okay. I can't come at the commission level and see Mr. Lowenfield presents a report with 10 certificates and tabulation of valid votes as determined by the district certificate recount certificates. And then next to me at the commission, I have, let's say, another 10 certificates that came from the OAS or some other observer group. And based, if the two are conflicting, then I'm choosing the international community. I have to, as a commission, act on only the one that's in front of me. Now, act on can mean consideration in this case. It doesn't mean that I have to take what you say, because if the law and the framework of the Constitution wanted to empower the CEO to make the decision and determination of who a president should be and who should sit in the National Assembly, then the Constitution would have made him, the framers of the Constitution would have made him the constitutional office holder, and they would have said so very clearly that the CEO shall determine who the president is and who the members of the National Assembly is, and there will be no need for a commission. And that did not happen. The framers of the Constitution and our elected officials who sit in the National Assembly to do legislation are not, well, not all, but they're not without basic common sense to know what they have to do and what not to do. So that, I mean, it's very hard to explain Mr. Williams's analysis, but the reality is what he has said there has absolutely no bearing and no relevance to the issue at hand. Mr. Lowenfield does not change, is subject to the direction and control of the commission. The chairwoman has acted. She has said, look, you, as your commanding officer, I'm telling you to do this. You have presented a report. We have read your report. Now I would like you to present the 10 certificates of the valid votes. And from these 10 certificates, the commission will act. That's all.
I'm getting from you there, Marcia, and correct me if I'm wrong, that with regards to the advice of the CEO, it's really a two-pronged process, where he provides that report with his advice. And after he would have done that, the commission would have examined his advice and the report submitted. Then he is instructed by the chair to prepare his final report.
Which has happened.
The issue of advice has already been completed in the first phase. And I think we have passed that phase when he did the first report and he put in the summary of the observations and his opinions and so on, like you said. That was his advice. We're no longer dealing with advice now. We're dealing with an instruction to the commission to use this information to prepare your final report. And I think that is where, in my view, the confusion is. The APNU seems to be going back to the first phase where he provided the advice before he was instructed on what to use.
Well, if it is that Mr. Lowenfield is taking his advice from persons from the APNU and AFC, the legal luminaries from that team, he would be warned to remember that the CCJ has basically said, your arguments as presented bear no weight or merit in our eyes. So I mean, and I'm trying very hard to be very diplomatic about it and not call it for what it is. But the reality is the CCJ has said, you're wrong. The APNU-AFC's representations are wrong.
Brigadier, I want to bring you, we need to wrap up now. I want to bring you in here. The reality is with all that is happening currently, there's a kind of a tense environment. People want this to be over with as soon as possible. Guyanese have been waiting very long. The situation, however, is a bit tense, and people anticipate, are in high anticipation of the GECOM's meeting today and the presentation of this report. What would you want to say to Guyanese at this point as we wrap this program?
Well, what I would say to Guyanese is that you've waited a long time and you have been of your best behavior while you waited a long time. And as far as I'm concerned, let us wait another day or two. The tension in our society can be eased by the communications or what is communicated by our leaders. We cannot have the PPPC leaders communicating, you know, that we are respecting the rule of law, right? Let us wait on the declaration. And then on the other side, the APNU continue to confuse their supporters with what they're communicating. What Mr. Williams, Mr. Basil Williams, the de facto Attorney General, communicated in today's paper is useless to this process. And Mr. Lowenfield should and must, perhaps I should follow Marcia and use the word shall. Mr. Lowenfield should ignore him, because what he's communicating is not helpful to the process. Mr. Lowenfield has a clear instruction from the chair of GECOM, and he must follow that instruction. And the wider Guyanese community, let us remain calm. This will come to an end, as I said before, once the commissioners are present and the report is submitted in keeping with the deadline. And if I'm to follow what happened in 2015, we can have a declaration today.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Phillips, Prime Minister-elect, and Marcia and Nadir Sharma for joining me this morning to update the Guyanese people on the current situation. Just to recap quickly, the Commission is expecting that report from Lowenfield at 2 today, and a meeting of the Commission is expected shortly after. And like you rightly said, Brigadier, if all goes well, all things equal, we may have a declaration before the end of today. So again, I want to thank both of you for joining us. And of course, to our viewers, we want to say thanks for being part of the program. We're going to be back here at 1 p.m. with another update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you to our viewers.